Mr. Lewis of Georgia. Mr. Lewis of Georgia votes aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 169, the nays are 243. Less than a majority voting in the affirmative.
Ms. Woolsey. Ms. Woolsey votes aye. Mr. Fleming. Mr. Fleming votes no.
The vote is now 170 yeas, 244 noes, less than a majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Alabama.
On that I demand a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Member will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The final vote on H.R. 3606, being called a major jobs bill, it's actually made up of 6 bills aimed at improving access for small and medium-sized companies and startups to capital.
are 389. The nays are 20.
Mr. Brady of Texas. Mr. Brady of Texas votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 390. The nays are 23. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that in the engrossment of H.R. 3606, the clerk be authorized to correct section numbers, punctuation, and cross-references, and to make other technical and conforming changes as may be necessary to accurately reflect the actions of the House.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 11 a.m. tomorrow. When the House adjourns tomorrow, it adjourn to meet at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, March the 13th, 2012. When the House adjourns on that date, it adjourns to meet on 10 a.m. on Friday, March the 16th, 2012. And when the House adjourns on that Friday, it adjourns to meet at 2 p.m. on Monday, March 19th, 2012.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The chair will now entertain motions for 1-minute requests. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate the Pennsylvania State University IFC Pan-Hellenic Dance Marathon, otherwise affectionately known as THON. THON's goal every year is to raise money for the Four Diamonds Fund at Penn State Hershey Children's Hospital. The fund was established to support children's cancer by assisting patients and their families through treatment. The fund has helped thousands of families by offsetting medical expenses incurred during cancer treatment. This year, THON broke the previous record and raised $10,698,924. Let me say it again. They raised over $10.6 million. That's amazing work. Congratulations. Penn State's THON has grown to become one of the largest student-run philanthropies in the world, and their effort have helped improve the lives of so many. As a proud Penn State alum and member representing the university here in Washington, I want to congratulate Penn State, the students, the donors, and all the organizations involved in the THON for another amazing year in support of a truly important cause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose is the gentleman from Massachusetts seeking recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today's New York Times headline, Intractable Afghan Graft Hampering U.S. Strategy. The subtitle, Elite Group is known for corruption, but high-level trials have been absent. Mr. Speaker, another story about corruption. Another story about Afghan President Karzai's complicity in corruption. This story appears while American servicemen and women continue to die in Afghanistan, while the American people continue to send billions of dollars each day to Afghanistan to sustain the Afghan government. Mr. Speaker, I've had it. The American people have had it. This war is not worth another American life. It is not worth another taxpayer dollar. I urge the President to bring our troops home now. I urge the President to end this war now. Enough is enough. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Americans, it's been 1,044 days since the United States Senate has passed a budget for America. You know, back in 2009, gasoline prices, the average American family spent $173.80 a month on gasoline. In 2011, that number had risen to $368.09 a month on gasoline. what could you use that difference, $194, what could you use that money for? I guarantee you with the policies coming out of this administration, gasoline prices are going up. It'll be more than $368 a month for gasoline unless we make changes to American energy policies and be energy independent. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
To address this House for 1 minute, I ask unanimous consent and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I have introduced H.R. 4170, a bill that will forgive student loan debt for millions of hardworking Americans. This bill provides that if a student loan borrower makes payments equal to 10% of their discretionary income for a period of 10 years, the balance of their federal student loan debt will be forgiven. This provides student loan borrowers with a second chance, those who have been struggling financially. And by cutting this debt, this frees up their money to invest on their own. That'll create new jobs throughout this country. It's time for Congress to stand for the rights of student loan borrowers. It's time to forgive these student loan debts. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the University of Arkansas at Little Rock women's basketball team for securing a spot in this year's NCAA basketball tournament. The game that put them into the tournament was an exciting one. The Lady Trojans came back from a 22-point deficit in the second half against Middle Tennessee and went on to win by 1 point in overtime. With Taylor Ford's game-winning shot, the Lady Trojans earned their second straight Sun Belt Conference tournament title and their third straight NCAA berth. Congratulations to the entire UALR community, to Coach Joe Foley for his leadership this championship season, and to the student athletes on this year's team. Thank you all for representing your school, the city of Little Rock, and our great state of Arkansas, and good luck.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition? Gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Mr. Speaker, cystic fibrosis is not a disease that affects a lot of Americans, but the Americans that it does affect, it compromises and all too often prematurely ends their lives. I had the great good fortune to just meet with a number of my constituents who are very concerned and involved with cystic fibrosis, including some young constituents who are with me in the chamber today. Mr. Speaker, we are an enlightened and good society because we invest the money necessary to solve the problems that affect our children and our people. We spend money on cures to eradicate diseases that compromise and end the quality of life for so many of our citizens. And as we do the hard work of getting our budget in order, Mr. Speaker, I ask that this chamber not erode that good work that we do. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Ask permission to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am here today to honor 4 American heroes: Carlos Costa, Mario de la Peña, Pablo Morales, and Armando Alejandre, Jr., who tragically lost their lives 16 years ago at the hands of the Castro dictatorship. On February 24th, 1996, 2 planes from the humanitarian organization Brothers to the Rescue were shot down under Fidel and Raul Castro's direct orders as they conducted air search and rescue missions for Cuban refugees trying to reach freedom. Raul Castro himself has publicly admitted to ordering the shoot-down over international waters so that there will be no evidence of the crime. But the Castro brothers have yet to be indicted for their role in ordering the murder of 4 innocent Americans, and they continue to commit blatant human rights violations towards peaceful civilians every day. The United States should move immediately to indict the Castro brothers for this crime. We must not turn our backs on the Cuban people who so tirelessly fight for freedom. And I ask, on this tragic anniversary, that we continue to push forward for democratic change in Cuba. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's time that we emphasize the facts about the price of gas in our country. On Inauguration Day for President Obama, the average price of gasoline was $1.84 per gallon. Today, it's $3.75. That's an increase of 103%. The estimate is that it will be $4.50 by May. A 1-cent increase in the cost of gas equals $1 billion out of the economy, and it's a $4 million per day cost to consumers. As the price of oil continues to rise at an alarming rate, the President and the congressional Democrats have tried to deflect the blame of their failed energy policies and point the finger at Wall Street speculators for the rise of a cost a barrel of oil. But that's not the problem, Mr. Speaker. The Obama administration's energy policies are creating uncertainty in the marketplace and driving up cost. We need this president to assume the responsibility for the problems that he's caused to the average hardworking American taxpayer and do something about the price of gas. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Are there further 1-minute requests? The Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Executive Order 12131 and the order of the House of January 5, 2011, of the following members of the House to the President's Export Council.
Mr. Reichert of Washington, Mr. Gerlach of Pennsylvania, Mr. Tiberi of Ohio, Ms. Sutton of Ohio, Ms. Linda Sanchez of California.
The Chair lays before the House following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Culberson of Texas for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, late last month, two bioethicists, Dr. Alberto Giubellini and Francesca Minerva, published an outrageous paper in the Journal of Medical Ethics justifying the deliberate, premeditated murder of newborn babies during the first days and even weeks after birth. Giubellini and Minerva wrote, and I quote, "When circumstances occur after birth that would have justified abortion, what we call after-birth abortion should be permissible." Mr. Speaker, they've just coined, Madam Speaker, a brand new phrase, after-birth abortion. The killing of newborns, the killing of little children, boys and girls, immediately after their birth and up to weeks later. These bioethicists argue that if a newly born child poses an economic burden on a family, or is disabled, or is unwanted, that child can be murdered in cold blood because the baby lacks intrinsic value, and according to Giubellini and Minerva, is simply not a person. Giubellini and Minerva write, and I quote again from their article, their paper, "Actual people's well-being," you and I, Madam Speaker, are actual people. Adults are actual people, according to them. Actual people's well-being could be threatened by a newborn, even if healthy, requiring energy, money, and care, which the family might happen to be in short supply of, close quote. As any parents, especially moms, will tell you, children in general and newborns in particular require an enormous amount of energy, money, and boatloads of love. If any of those things, however, are lacking or pose what Giubilini and Minerva call a threat, does that justify a death sentence? Are the lives of newborn children and newborn babies so cheap, so expendable? The murder of newly born children is further justified by Giubilini and Minerva in this renowned journal's article. Why they carried it is certainly suspect. But they argue that it's further justified because newborn infants, like their slightly younger sisters and brothers in the womb, quote, cannot have formed any aim that she is prevented from accomplishing. In other words, no dreams, no plans for the future, no, quote, aims that can be discerned, recognized, or understood by adults equals no life at all. This preposterous, arbitrary, and evil prerequisite for the attainment of legal personhood is not only bizarre, it is inhumane in the extreme. Stripped of its pseudo-intellectual underpinnings, Giubilini and Minerva's rationale for murdering newborns in the nursery is indistinguishable from any other child predator wielding a knife or a gun. Giubilini and Minerva say the devaluation of unborn babies is inextricably linked to the devaluation of unborn children. So let me say that again. The devaluation of newborn babies, even into weeks of their life outside their mother's womb, is inextricably linked to the devaluation of unborn children and is indeed the logical extension of the abortion culture. And they write this, that they propose to call the practice of afterbirth abortion rather than infanticide in order to emphasize that the moral status of the individual killed, that is to say the unborn baby, the baby, is comparable to that of a fetus. Whether she will exist is exactly what our choice is about, they write. So let's again get this right. Because the unborn child has been deemed to be a non-person and can be killed at will, the newborn child, who is very, very similar in almost every aspect except dependency and a little bit less or more mature, that the choice is, if they're unwanted, the parents can order the killing, the execution of that child. Madam Speaker, these anti-child, pro-murder rationalizations remind me of other equally disturbing rants from highly credentialed individuals over the years. Princeton's Peter Singer suggested a couple of years ago, and I quote him in pertinent part, that there are various things you could say that are sufficient to give moral status to a child. After a few months, maybe 6 months or something like that, and you get perhaps a full moral status. Really, only after 2 years. Break that down. Only after 2 years, Madam Speaker, should we really confer a sense of personhood to a child who is no longer a baby anymore because of this particular intellectual's perspective. Dr. James Watson, the Nobel laureate for unraveling the mystery of DNA many, many years ago, wrote in Prism magazine, and I quote this, "If a child were not declared alive until 3 days after birth, then all parents could be allowed the choice. Only a few are given under the present system. The doctor could allow the child to die if the parents so chose and save a lot of misery and suffering. I believe this view is the only rational, compassionate attitude to have." Compassionate to allow a newborn to die? I think not. In like manner, Dr. Francis Crick, who received the Nobel Peace Prize, along with Watson, said, and I quote, "No newborn infant should be declared human until it has passed certain tests regarding its genetic endowment, and that if it fails these tests, it forfeits the right to live." Madam Speaker, the dehumanization of unborn children has been going on for decades. What is less understood and appreciated is the dehumanization of newborn and very young infants. That, too, has been going on for years, but it has gotten, in the last few years, demonstrably worse. Drs. Giubilini and Minerva's article must serve as a wake-up call. The lives of young children, who are truly the most unprotected class of individuals in our society, are under assault. Hard questions need to be asked and answered, and defenders of life must be mobilized. I truly believe we have a duty to protect the weakest and the most vulnerable from violence, and now even the hospital nursery is not a place of refuge or sanctuary. Madam Speaker, we must strive for consistency. Why do so many, and I have been here, Madam Speaker, for 32 years, and I work every single day of my congressional life on human rights issues, from human trafficking to religious freedom. I've written the Trafficking Victims Protection Act back in 2000 to combat modern-day slavery. I work against torture all over the world, wherever and whenever it rears its horrific head, and that is especially in places like China, North Korea, and elsewhere. But I am left to wonder why so many who claim to be proponents of human rights systematically dehumanize and exclude the weakest and the most vulnerable human beings from legal protection. Why the modern-day surge in prejudice and ugly bias against unborn children, and now by logical extension, newborn children? Why the policy of exclusion rather than inclusion? They are indeed part of the human family. We should embrace them, love them, and protect them. Why is lethal violence against children, abortion and premeditated killing of newborn infants, marketed and sold as somehow benign or progressive, enlightened, and compassionate? Why have so many good people turned a blind eye and looked askance as mothers are wounded by abortion and their babies in the womb pulverized by suction machines 20 to 30 times more powerful than household vacuum cleaners, or dismembered with surgical knives, or poisoned with chemicals? Looking back, how could anyone in the House or the Senate or President Clinton justify the hideous procedure called partial birth abortion? Madam Speaker, since 1973, well over 54 million babies have had abortion forced upon them. Some of those children have been exterminated in the second and third trimester. These are known as pain-capable babies, and those kids have suffered excruciating pain as the abortionist committed his violence upon him or her. Why are some surprised that now the emerging class of victims, newborn kids, newborn children, are being slaughtered in Holland and elsewhere, while a perverse proposal to murder any newborn children, sick or healthy, is advanced in an otherwise serious and respected ethics journal? I urge members to read this article. It will make you sick. It certainly is the opening salvo in an assault on newborn children. So in conclusion, Madam Speaker, children born and unborn are precious. Children, sick, disabled, or healthy, possess fundamental human rights that no sane or compassionate society can abridge. The premeditated murder of newborn babies, those who are 1 day old after birth, 2 weeks, 3 weeks old, is now being justified as being morally equivalent to abortion. I respectfully submit, Madam Speaker, that the Congress, the courts, the President, and society at large have a sacred duty to protect all children from violence, murder, and exploitation. We don't have a moment to lose. The child predators are working overtime to create more victims. Madam Speaker, I would like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Dan Burton, such time as he may consume. Okay. Okay. Madam Speaker, I do yield back the balance of my time.
Okay.
I thought you wanted my time. Sorry, everyone. You bet, Dennis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to...
The gentleman would suspend.
Okay.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, is recognized for 48 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, yesterday, a good friend of mine, Senator John McCain, became the first U.S. Senator to publicly call for U.S.-led airstrikes to halt the violence in Syria. Respectfully, I disagree with the Senator from Arizona. Our main goal in the Middle East is to protect our interests and the interest of our major ally, Israel. If we are to be dragged into a civil war in Syria for humanitarian reasons, I would respectfully remind Senator McCain and the President that they do not have the power to unilaterally start a war. The authority to initiate war is vested by the Constitution exclusively in Congress. And the War Powers Act was enacted into law over a presidential veto, not an easy thing to accomplish, to fulfill the intent of the framers of the Constitution of the United States in requiring that the President has to seek the consent of Congress before the introduction of United States armed forces into hostile action. Section 2C of the War Powers Act provides that no attempt by the President to introduce the United States armed forces into hostile action may be made under the War Powers Act unless, number one, there's a declaration of war, number two, a specific authorization, or number three, a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possession, or its armed forces. The Constitution and the War Powers Act are not a list of suggestions. They are the law of the land. The law, the President of the United States and every member of Congress swears to protect and defend. Contrary to Defense Secretary Panetta's assertion before the Senate Armed Services Committee the other day, international permission does not trump congressional permission. If the President is even remotely entertaining the idea of engaging in military action in Syria, he must seek formal authorization from Congress to attack Syria first. While the violence in Syria is appalling, and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is certainly no friend of the United States, before any military action is taken, the President must tell Congress and the American people by what right we attack Syria. Syria has not declared war on the United States, nor attacked the United States, our territories, possessions, or armed forces. It is not our responsibility to intervene simply because violence erupts in another nation. If it were, then bombs should be falling on a number of countries, including Yemen, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Sudan, Rwanda, North Korea, Burma, and I could go on and on. In fact, just this past Tuesday, March the 6th, the former top United Nations humanitarian official in Sudan warned that the country's military is carrying out crimes against humanity in the country's southern Nuba Mountains in acts that remind him of the 2003-2004 genocide in Darfur. Sudan President Omar al-Bashir is under indictment for war crimes by the International Criminal Court for killings and rapes committed in Darfur. Roughly 5,000 people have died in Syria compared to 400,000 in Darfur. How are the actions of al-Assad any worse than the actions of al-Bashir? Where is the call to bomb Sudan? Madam Speaker, we could have a war of the week if we went after every tyrant that's committing these kinds of atrocities. Well-respected organizations, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have documented the crimes committed by Burma's military. Many of the abuses committed by the Burmese regime represent some of the world's most horrific ongoing atrocities. For example, the regime has destroyed over 3,300 ethnic minority villages in eastern Burma alone. 3,300 villages have been destroyed. Recruited tens of thousands of children, child soldiers, forced up to 2 million people to flee their homes as refugees and internally displaced, and used rape as a weapon of war against the women of Burma. How is the violence going on in Syria any worse than the destruction and degradation committed by the Burmese junta? North Korea is widely acknowledged to be the worst violator of human rights in the world. The regime cares so little for its people that authorities are imprisoning for 6 months in labor training camps anybody who did not participate in the organized gatherings during the mourning period for the late Kim Jong-il, or who did not participate but didn't cry, but who did participate but didn't cry and didn't seem genuine. 6 months in a labor camp for not crying? North Korea is a recognized state sponsor of terror, a proliferator of nuclear weapons, and a direct threat to the United States forces in South Korea. Yet no one is urging the bombing of North Korea. The world is full of despotic and oppressive regimes. The sad fact is that even in 2012, more of the world labors in the shadow of tyranny than in the daylight of democracy and the rule of law. Many of the world's leaders are at least as bad as Gaddafi and al-Assad, and many are even worse. We are not the world's policemen. Even if we are willing to ignore the hypocrisy of using military force in Syria for, quote, humanitarian reasons, while we turn a blind eye to the other equally pressing humanitarian crises around the world, there are several practical issues surrounding an operation in Syria that make it ill-advised. And this case should be made to the Congress if the President or Senator McCain push for military action against Syria. Libya and Syria are very different countries with different geographies and different militaries. The Libyan army of Gaddafi was far less capable than Syria's army under Assad. Its forces were not as well trained, well fed, or well armed. In fact, Gaddafi had decisively turned on his armed forces after a series of military coup attempts in the 1980s and 90s. In the place of a professional military, Gaddafi increasingly relied on the revolutionary committees, many of whom defected en masse within days of protests breaking out against his rule. Even against such a weak opposition, NATO's bombing campaign only succeeded in pushing the loyal forces back. The rebels were unable to advance very far. As the battle turned into a stalemate, NATO and others were forced to raise its commitment, and the United States spent billions of dollars in that conflict as well without congressional approval. Trainers were sent in, and NATO personnel shared space in the rebels' operation rooms in Benghazi, and Qatar had to ship in approximately 30 consignment of Milan anti-tank cannons and Belgian FN rifles. During the final assault on Gaddafi's compound, Qatari forces even found themselves leading the charge. Nearly a year into the civil war to oust President Assad, the Syrian army remains largely intact. In addition, Syria has a substantial chemical and biological weapons capability and thousands of surface-to-air missiles and shoulder-launched missiles, making Syria much more of a threat to attacking air forces than anything Libya had. How will the American people react if an American pilot is shot down and captured by the Syrian army, or worse, Syria's terrorist proxy, Hezbollah? And that's why Congress must be consulted before we take any action, and I would urge any of my colleagues who are considering urging the President to take unilateral action that they remember the War Powers Act and the Constitution. In addition, if air power is to be used against Assad's regime, as it was to overthrow Gaddafi's, then it is certain that the venture will take longer than the 6 months it took in Libya. The price in Syrian blood on both sides, the rebels and the governments, will be higher, and the geography of the country, without the vast stretches of desert between towns that were turned into shooting galleries when Gaddafi tried to remove his forces, would guarantee more civilian casualties from NATO bombs than occurred in Libya. How many civilian casualties are acceptable to prevent a humanitarian crisis? other questions that need to be addressed. What will Israel do if Hezbollah responds to Western military actions against Syria by launching rockets into Israel? What will Iran do to protect its ally in Damascus? Finally, brutally, we must ask the question, is the devil we know better than the devil we don't know? And here I'd like to divert just a minute from my prepared text. When we saw the changes in Libya, we didn't know who was going to take over. We didn't know that Sharia law was going to be the rule of law there, which took them back into a more radical stance. In Egypt, the elections that have taken place after Mubarak has been removed from power have led to the suspicion, very strong suspicion, that Sharia law will be imposed in Egypt as well. We don't know what that will do to the Camp David peace accords and whether or not that could cause our ally Israel to be in more danger. We need to know before we get into a war to change regimes what we're getting in place of the people we're removing. Gaddafi, as bad as he was, and I didn't like him at all, and I think he should have been removed, was no threat to the United States or our allies. He was a threat to his own people, and yet we decided unilaterally to go in and get him. And we did, along with the French and our NATO allies. And now they're talking about, some of my colleagues, going into Syria and removing al-Assad without congressional approval, unilaterally by the President, and we don't know what we'll be getting. We have found recently from reports that al-Qaeda forces are in Syria assisting the rebels. Now, we have to make sure that if al-Assad goes, that we don't have a base of operations for the enemies of freedom in Syria. We know what we've got. We don't like it, but we better be careful before we start making a regime change there that al-Qaeda doesn't take over or have a big influence in Syria that will cause problems for the United States, our ally Israel, and others in the Middle East later on. While Senator McCain, my good friend, may angrily deny it, the assessment of the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, and half a dozen intelligence reports and independent news agencies is that al-Qaeda has inserted themselves inside armed opposition groups in Syria. As I just said, al-Qaeda is there. They're the mortal enemy of everything we believe in, and they're involved with the rebels there. And we need to be sure we're doing the right thing if we participate and if the Congress approves of some action in Syria. Do we really want to undertake a significant military commitment? Those are the words of Marine General James Mattis, head of the U.S. Central Command, to create so-called safe havens in Syria to deliver weapons and supplies to al-Qaeda fighters from Iraq. I believe that the sun is slowly setting on the Assad regime in Syria. I sincerely hope that we are not pushed into a war we do not fully understand and that we don't really need to be in. And I must remind my colleagues in both the House and the Senate one more time, the President nor a few senators or members of Congress have the right to demand or push for unilateral action by the United States without the Congress of the United States being involved in the decision-making process. That has happened in other countries in the past. It happened in Libya, but it should not happen anymore because the Constitution and the War Powers Act and the rule of law must be maintained by the Congress of the United States. And with that, I yield my time. I don't know if anybody else wants time under this hour, but I yield my time back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, for 30 minutes. How are you?
Madam Speaker, I very much appreciate the time and you staying with me on a late on a Thursday afternoon to do this. Thursday afternoon, Madam Speaker, Friday afternoon. Thursday afternoon. I'm losing track of my days because I'm on the Budget Committee, Madam Speaker. I'm on the Budget Committee, and this is budget season, and we are going nonstop, meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, to try to find that budget that not only guarantees that our safety net programs like Medicare and Social Security will be there for generations to come, but that also guarantee that America will be here for generations to come. Because if you've looked at the deficits that we're running, if you've looked at the economic circumstances that we're in, if you've looked at the $15 trillion, now $16 trillion that we've passed on to our children and our grandchildren, you know that our economic future is at risk. We talk so much, Madam Speaker, about the things that divide us in Washington. I sometimes think that's unfortunate. There's really a lot that unites us, and I've brought with me today some quotes from President Obama in the State of the Union speeches that he's given right here between where you and I stand today, Madam Speaker, when he's come to the joint session of Congress to deliver. This is what he said in 2010. The President said, "We should start where most new jobs do, in small businesses, companies that begin when an entrepreneur takes a chance on a dream, or a worker decides it's time that she became her own boss. Through sheer grit and determination, these companies have weathered the recession and they are ready to grow." Wow. Who is that talking, Madam Speaker? Is that a Republican? Is that a Democrat? That's an American. That is an American talking about the American dream of being your own boss and growing a business, employing your neighbors, growing the American economy. The President understood that when he gave his State of the Union speech in 2010. In 2011, Madam Speaker, the President returned right here to this very same room and he said this: "At stake right now is not who wins the next election. At stake is whether new jobs and industries take root in this country or somewhere else." And he was exactly right. He's exactly right about the grit that it takes for entrepreneurs to grow jobs in this country. And he is right that the question is not who wins the next election. The question is, how do we ensure that new jobs and new industries take place in America instead of somewhere else around the globe? Again, in 2011, Madam Speaker, the President said this in his State of the Union speech: "We measure progress by the success of our people, by the jobs they can find and the quality of life those jobs offer, by the prospects of a small business owner who dreams of turning a good idea into a thriving enterprise, by the opportunities for a better life that we pass on to our children." Madam Speaker, we see so much in the newspaper about what divides us in this country. These are words that unite us, words that Republicans, Democrats, Americans from north and south, east and west can all get behind. They don't stop in 2011. Here he is in 2012. Just 2 months ago, Madam Speaker, right here in this chamber. "To reduce barriers to growth and investment, I've ordered a review of government regulations. When we find rules that are unnecessary, that put an unnecessary burden on business, we will fix them." 2 months ago, right here in this chamber. Madam Speaker, you know, as I know, that business in this country is under assault. And when business in this country is under assault, American families in this country are under assault. Entrepreneurship in this country is under assault. The very basis of the American dream of being able to put in a hard day's work for a hard day's wage, to be able to change your station in life by the power of your ideas and the sweat of your brow, it's at risk. And why? I have here, Madam Speaker, a chart that shows the regulatory burden in this nation. What it actually charts is those regulations that come out of Washington, D.C., that the implementation costs alone are $100 million a year. The implementation costs alone, not what it burdens businesses with in terms of lost revenues, not the number of jobs that it kills, not how many jobs it pushes overseas to China, to India, and elsewhere instead of keeping those jobs in America, but just what it costs out of someone's wallet to actually implement that regulation. This is what we see. 1995, of course, that was a Republican Congress with Newt Gingrich leading as Speaker, a Democratic President with Bill Clinton. You see this kind of level line at about 80 regulations a year. 80 regulations a year. It goes along and along through the Clinton administration, through the Bush administration, and then we get to 2006, when America decided they could tell no difference between Republicans and Democrats, and they threw the Republicans out of control of the Congress, as well they should have. As well they should have. But what happened in that elections have consequences. When they threw Republicans out of the leadership of the U.S. House of Representatives, the number of regulations began to skyrocket. Even with President Bush in the White House, this Congress is where that legislation begins. The number of regulations on small business begins to skyrocket. Then we get to 2008, when President Obama is sworn into the White House, when Democrats rule both the House and the Senate, and you see regulations and the burden they cause rise right to the top. Madam Speaker, the decisions we make in this chamber have consequences. It's not a nothing to tell a small business that there's a new rule or regulation that small business has to comply with, because it takes money and it takes time to comply with those regulations. They need to be important, and we need to take a look at it. The President says all the right things. I just couldn't agree with him more. To reduce barriers to growth and investment, I've ordered a review of government regulations. When we find rules that are unnecessary, are an unnecessary burden on business, we will fix them. The speech says all the right things, Madam Speaker, but the evidence suggests that we are on a regulatory spending spree, the likes of which this country has never seen. And if you think for a minute we cannot destroy the entrepreneurial spirit in this country, you're mistaken. You know, entrepreneurial activity, Madam Speaker, is at a historic low in America today. I'm not talking about the number of businesses that succeed. I'm talking about the number of Americans who dare to try. You know, economic good times come and economic bad times come. The economy will always ebb and flow. But when Americans are afraid to try, when the regulatory burden is such that Americans do not dare to try, we are threatening the future of this nation and the economic success of our children and our grandchildren. You know, they published an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, Madam Speaker. It was written by one of the 4 founders of Home Depot. Now, Madam Speaker, as you know, I'm a freshman congressman from the great state of Georgia, birthplace of Home Depot. Hope folks have had an opportunity to go and shop there. Hope you've had an opportunity to take your kids over and do some of the morning craft projects that they do there at the Home Depot. Wear the orange apron. But this is what that founder said. If we got together today, the 4 of them who got together to found Home Depot, if we got together today with our same idea, our same intellect, our same capital, if we gathered together today, we could not make Home Depot succeed. Why? Because the regulatory burden in America is too great to allow for business growth. Madam Speaker, these challenges that we face are not global challenges about which we have no control. They are domestic challenges about which we have complete control. We choose, Madam Speaker, which regulations we pass and which ones we say no to. And I'm proud to say, Madam Speaker, since this new Congress was sworn in, we have not implemented one more regulation on this line. We are trying to turn back. We have the Jobs Act this week to turn back the clock on that regulatory burden to allow folks with energy and creativity to begin to grow jobs again. But it's a team sport. Let me take you back to the rhetoric, Madam Speaker. And you know, rhetoric has a pejorative term to it. I shouldn't say rhetoric, Madam Speaker. Let me take you back to the State of the Union speech that the President gave right here in this chamber. Again, I listened to those State of the Union speeches, and I confess I may be a rock-solid conservative Republican from the Deep South, but those speeches move me from time to time. They move me because I agree with the words that the President says. I just disagree with the actions that he does. Here we go, 2009. State of the Union speech again, Madam Speaker, right here in this chamber. The President said this: "Given these realities, everyone in this chamber, Democrats and Republicans, will have to sacrifice some worthy priorities for which there are no dollars, and that includes me. He says leadership begins with him, and he's absolutely right. You know, Madam Speaker, we don't have control over the whole government in this chamber, but we do have control over the budget of this chamber. And, you know, the budget that you've allocated to my office, to the 7th District of Georgia, is lower this year than the budget that the 7th District of Georgia had in 2008. These things about which we have control, Madam Speaker, we know leadership begins at home, and we are starting with the tough budget cuts right here in the House chamber. The President said the same thing in 2009. He said there has to be some sacrifice of worthy priorities for which there are no dollars. And when we have a $16 trillion deficit, Madam Speaker, we know that there are no dollars. This is 2010. Same President, same State of the Union speech right here in this chamber. The President says this: families across the country are tightening their belts and making tough decisions. The federal government should do the same. He's absolutely right. He is absolutely right, Madam Speaker. Families across this country are absolutely making changes, absolutely doing what it takes to balance their budgets. The federal government can and must do the same. He said it in 2009. He said it in 2010. Madam Speaker, here we are in 2011, same State of the Union speech. He says this: every day families sacrifice to live within their means. They deserve a government that does the same. Madam Speaker, again, he's absolutely right. He was right when he said it in 2009. He was right when he said it in 2010. He was right when he said it in 2011. But, Madam Speaker, he hasn't done anything about it. And that's the challenge. It's an election year, and folks like to say all the right things, Madam Speaker, but I didn't come to this chamber as a freshman to say the right things. I came to this chamber to do the right things. What I have here is a chart of the President's budget that he submitted this year. Now, let me first say, Madam Speaker, that as you know, the United States Senate has ignored the laws of the United States of America and has not submitted a budget to this Congress in 1,044 days, and they have said they're not going to do it again this year. Harry Reid said it would be foolish to do a budget. That just so happens the law requires that they do a budget, but foolish, he said. The President, to his credit, did put forward a budget. And I say to his credit because it's hard. A budget is a moral document. I didn't bring a copy of the President's budget with me today, Madam Speaker, but it's about 12 inches tall. And you have to go line by line by line and talk about what's important to you. Is there enough money to go around everything? No, there's not. So what's important to you? Where are you going to put your dollars? The President, to his credit, went through that very hard process and sent a budget to Capitol Hill. What I have here is a visual representation of the budget that he sent, Madam Speaker, and if you can see, I have a white dotted line here that represents current law. This white dotted line that runs right through here is the current law, and if we do nothing, Madam Speaker, if we do absolutely nothing, this is the trajectory on which American debt will grow. If we do nothing. The President submitted his budget in February. I've represented the President's budget by this large red line, by this large red triangle. The red line is what the President proposes that the deficit be. I mean, we can go back to his 2011 State of the Union address where he said everyday families sacrifice to live within their means. The government must do the same. We can go back to 2010 when he said the same thing. We can go back to 2009 when he said the same thing. But in 2012, when he submits his budget, he actually runs the deficit up in 2012, up in 2013, up in 2014, up in 2015, and 16, and 17, and 18, and 19, and 20, and 21. And what I've done, Madam Speaker, is I've blown up a little circle way out there at 2022. There's a little green space right here. And way out there in 2022, the President's budget begins to reduce the deficit that this country faces from what it is under current law today. Madam Speaker, that's my frustration. How often is it in this body that we hear folks say all the right things? Families sacrifice to live within their means, says the President. We deserve a government that does the same. 2011, 2010, families across the country are tightening their belts and making tough decisions. The federal government must do the same. 2009, Given these realities, Democrats and Republicans will have to sacrifice some worthy priorities for which there are no dollars. And that includes me, but, Madam Speaker, the evidence reveals exactly the opposite. And what folks may not know, and I encourage you to go and read the President's budget. Again, he did the right thing by submitting it, and I admire him for doing that. It's located at www.omb, Office of Management and Budget, omb.gov, and it's got charts and graphs and all the numbers. But what happens in that budget, Madam Speaker, is taxes go up by $2 trillion. $2 trillion taxes go up on the American people. Now listen, we're in deficit times. We have revenue issues here. We need to have that debate about taxation. But my question to the White House is, how can you raise taxes by $2 trillion on the American people and not reduce America's deficit by 1 penny for 9 years? And the answer is that you raise those taxes by $2 trillion, and then you go and you spend it on other priorities. The President knows and has said in State of the Union address after State of the Union address after State of the Union address that we have to curb the appetite for spending in Washington. And yet here in the fourth budget, the last budget of his first term, and candidly the most serious budget of his administration, he still has not found those items that he's willing to be honest with the American people about and say, we can't afford this. This puts our children and our grandchildren and, in fact, our entire republic at risk. Now, there's a lot of blame that goes on in this town, Madam Speaker, and I don't take any pride in pointing out the challenges of other people's ideas, but I do take pride in pointing out the merit of our own ideas. What I have here, Madam Speaker, is another graphical representation of the tough choices that we in this House, Madam Speaker, with your support and my support and the support of members on both sides of the aisles, the tough choices that we agreed to make on behalf of America. What I have here is a chart that shows America's debt as a percentage of GDP, as a percentage of the entire economy. Down here in black, Madam Speaker, is the historic debt. You see down here in the World War II era, 1940s, then coming down in the 1950s, this is the historic debt of America. During the global conflict that was World War II, we ran America's debt up to 100% of the size of the entire economy. Why? Because we were fighting a madman overseas, and everything depended on us winning. And so we borrowed to the hilt, Madam Speaker, 100% of GDP to invest in the war effort that saved freedom around the globe. Well, then we begin to pay those debts down, Madam Speaker. Come forward to 2000, 2010. This red line is the current path of America. This red line, if as the President dodged the tough decisions this year, if the Congress dodges those tough decisions, this red line represents where America is headed. Here we have at 100, Madam Speaker, that level of debt during the largest conflict this world has ever seen, at which the freedom of the planet hung in the balance. We are headed to that level and higher, Madam Speaker, 100% higher, 200% higher, 300% higher, 400% higher, with absolutely no conflict of that size on the horizon. We're just spending it here not to fight a national emergency, not to rise to meet an international challenge, but just spending it here. The green line here, Madam Speaker, represents the plan that you and I and this House have passed. You know, it's the only budget that's passed anywhere in the city of Washington, D.C., in the last 3 years. Only one budget has passed anywhere in the city of Washington, D.C. in 3 years, and it was this one, the one that we did right here, Madam Speaker, that changes the trajectory of America's economic path, that takes us from a path to ruin back to a path of possibility and opportunity, ultimately paying down our federal debt. Well, how did we do that? We did that by making tough decisions. We did that by going into the budget and asking the question, how can we do better? You know, Madam Speaker, in the great state of Georgia, if you talk to our Department of Transportation, they will tell you that we can build a Georgia road, same mile of pavement, same safety specifications, same everything. We can build a mile of Georgia highway for about 60% of the exact same mile of federal highway. Why? Because of the regulatory burden that begins in Washington, D.C. and flows downward. Because every agency that touches every dollar this town sends back to the people that it took those dollars from skims just a little bit off the top for administrative costs. Just a little bit off the top. We have to find ways to do better. And we have to find ways, Madam Speaker, to behave differently. This is one example. How many town hall meetings have you had, Madam Speaker, where folks have come up to you and said, "Dadgummit, Madam Speaker, I've paid into Medicare all my life. I need those benefits to be there for me when I retire." I hear that all the time. Shoot, I've been paying into Medicare all my life. I need those benefits to be there, too. I absolutely agree and understand why it is when folks have invested through their taxes, through their paychecks, in a promise that the government committed that would be there for them in their time of need, why it is that Americans believe the government should come through on that. But there's things about Medicare we don't like to talk about, Madam Speaker. I have here a chart of Medicare revenue, where it is the dollars come in to pay for Medicare, because if you haven't looked at the numbers recently, Madam Speaker, you know we're spending about 40% of every penny in the federal government. About 40% of every penny in federal spending goes to Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid. Just two programs consume 40% of every dollar that we spend. In 1964, there was no Medicare and Medicaid. Didn't spend a penny in those directions. Now we spend 40 cents out of every dollar, and that number's growing. Well, what you learn when you get to Congress, Madam Speaker, and you start going through all these committee hearings, is there's a lot that they didn't tell you back home. Medicare Part A, that's the hospital program. That's the part for our parents and our grandparents when you go into the hospital. In fact, when we designed the Medicare program in 1965 as Americans, we said folks should not lose everything they have when they have a catastrophic illness and get hospitalized. We should have a support system to protect them in their time of need. And we did. We created Medicare Part A, and that's what every working American, whether they started working at 15 or 16 or 17 or 18, they see that FICA line on their check, Madam Speaker. Those dollars are coming out of every American's check, no matter how much they earn, all the way to the top of the income spectrum. Every paycheck has about 3.5% taken out to fund Medicare. Now, what happens? That amount that's taken out of all the American paychecks is represented in this light blue line here. It covers about 84% of Medicare Part A costs. Medicare Part A, this hospital insurance that we're providing. Every penny that we've taken from every American covers about 84 cents of the cost of the program. But you know, after we created Medicare Part A, Madam Speaker, we created Medicare Part B. Medicare Part B is funded with $0 out of your and my paycheck. $0 out of any paycheck of anyone in America. Not one penny in Medicare taxes is taken out to fund Medicare Part B. Now, we charge Medicare Part B premiums, Madam Speaker. Now, Part B is what pays for your doctor's visits and supplies, things like that. We ask Medicare beneficiaries to write the government a check to cover 25% of those Part B costs. But the other 75%, 74 here because there's a little interest that gets picked up in there, 74% of all of those costs are picked up by the American taxpayer, just out of general revenues. You wonder where the money goes. Understand, we have told America that you pay into Medicare and so you shall receive from Medicare. You've paid in all your life, so it will be there in your time of need, and so we will ensure that it is there in your time of need. But that's just Medicare Part A. about $200 billion. Medicare Part B is exactly the same size at $200 billion, and we never paid a penny for it, but the government is pushing all those dollars out the door. Move on to Medicare Part D, Madam Speaker. Medicare Part D, that largest expansion of entitlement programs in the history of the country since 1967, implemented by a Republican Congress and a Republican president. Yes, we charge Americans, we ask Americans to pay some beneficiary premiums to get Medicare Part D. About 11% of all Medicare Part D revenue comes from beneficiary premiums. 83% is picked up by the American taxpayer at large. No one ever paid a penny out of their pocket to deposit in a trust fund for that benefit. It's just a benefit that sprang up out of thin air, Madam Speaker, and 83% of it is subsidized by American taxpayers across this country. Now, I bring up these numbers for two reasons, Madam Speaker. Number one, because folks just don't know. Folks just don't know. You're at home and you're talking about Medicare. You're looking at your paycheck. You see that you're paying Medicare taxes. You think those taxes are going into the trust fund to fund the Medicare program. Well, they are. They're just going into the trust fund to fund the Medicare Part A program. Medicare Part B and Medicare Part D have absolutely no trust funds at all. They never have. They get funded out of general revenues. We have made promises to people about benefits that they will receive for which they never paid a penny. Madam Speaker, we have $16 trillion in debt that we're passing on to our children and our grandchildren. The days of being able to promise people something for nothing are long gone. We have to be able to have candid conversations with today's seniors, with tomorrow's seniors. I'm in my 40s, with my generation, Madam Speaker, and we have to renegotiate the Medicare contract with folks my age and younger. We have to do it. America cannot, Madam Speaker, sustain this path of debt. You know, I feel a little disingenuous putting this chart up here, Madam Speaker. This is the one of the current path of debt. The truth is that if you're running the computer models, they really break down somewhere right about here. They really say that the laws of economics, what we know about the world banking system, what we know about commerce in this country, what they really say is, right about here, America's going to cease to exist anyway. That the numbers just don't work, that the economy just won't function, that America as we know it will be over here. It's not going to get as bad as I presented, Madam Speaker, because the republic as we know it will have gone away. You know, we talk so much about the debt limit on this floor, Madam Speaker, the debt limit, as if it's something that Congress passes. Every American knows a debt limit is not a law on a piece of paper. A debt limit is when you can't find anyone to lend you money anymore. The debt limit comes when the Chinese say, no, America, you're a bad credit risk, we're not going to give you any more. When the Germans say, no, America, you're a bad credit risk, we're not going to give you any more. Well, on the Budget Committee, we had that hearing, Madam Speaker, and we brought in economists from the left and economists from the right, and we asked them all, folks, tell us, how much longer do we have? When does the real debt limit get here? When the American economy can no longer find anyone willing to lend to them. And this is what they said. Madam Speaker, the liberal economists that came to talk to us said, we think you have 5 years. 5 years before that day comes. The conservative economists said, we think you have 2 years before that day comes. So we have a window, Madam Speaker, between 2 and 5 years when the entire economy is going to begin to come unraveled, when American jobs and businesses are going to be at risk, when our entire experiment as a republic will be challenged. And the President in his budget this year introduced a $2 trillion tax increase and found a way to save us just a little bit of money 9 years from now. Madam Speaker, we don't have 9 years. Every day that passes makes the problem harder to solve. Every day that passes removes arrows from our quiver of solutions. Every day that passes threatens the survival of our republic, and that is why we presented the path to prosperity, Madam Speaker, as a solution. Madam Speaker, I thank you for providing me the time today to talk a little bit about this budget. I hope folks will go to the